Conformity. In the world of A Quiet Place, the family that we follow is forced to adapt to many conditions brought upon by the monsters we see in the film. From the light system we see in the climax of the film to the worn spots on the floor of the house, everything is meticulously thought out to ensure maximum chances of survival. We can see this not only in A Quiet Place, but in our own world as well. Many people who don't conform to the standards society expects of them are usually pressured by the society around them to eventually conform, even if it damages them physically, mentally, or emotionally, similar to how our characters have to live in A Quiet Place.
During the film, we seldom see anyone outside of the family, except of course the scene where Lee and Marcus come upon an elderly man and his dead wife. In our world, ageism is very much present, as aging causes many to lose the appearance and abilities they once had. Many people even view elderly people as worthless, as many are too old to work. In this world, being old becomes a severe liability as the disadvantages of the aging body present a myriad of reasons to make some kind of noise. It would also be difficult for the elderly people in this situation to create accommodations like Lee and his family were able to create. Though, we see that the old man and woman were able to survive quite a long time, being forced by the monsters to conform to the difficult expectations in this world. This is much like how many elderly people today have to come out of retirement to even afford to live in our world due to costs of living and the pressure by society to work to not be viewed as worthless.
Now let's talk about the opposite end of the spectrum. Kids. In the world of A Quiet Place, things that would be seen only as nuisances in our world are nearly a death sentence. Pretty much everyone has had the experience of walking into a Walmart and hearing the high-pitched wails of a cranky child, upset by the toys they can't have. Whether it's a baby crying on a plane or a young kid who just won't go to bed, many people wish that these kids would just be quiet and conform to the rest of adult society who just want to commute, eat, and shop in peace. Now, we already have physical representations of this pressure on kids to conform in the form of stares, glares, and the shushes of parents. And though much darker and scarier, the monsters of A Quiet Place have essentially the same function. Bo must give up his toy and be quiet, something not in his nature as a young child, for a purpose he does not understand, that being the monsters. Just like how kids in our world are made to be quiet and sit still for reasons that do not make sense to them. A Quiet Place also shows this situation from a parent's perspective and the pressure that parents have on them to either keep their kid in line with society or move out of its way. In our world, that would be a parent leaving Walmart with the screaming kid, while in A Quiet Place, that means sticking your newborn in a coffin crib with a gas mask.
And how are kids created? One of the biggest plot points in A Quiet Place is the mother, Evelyn, being pregnant. Due to this, many precautions have to be taken to make sure the pregnancy and the childbirth are kept as quiet as humanly possible, which seems like a nearly impossible task. She also has to keep a large amount of medication with her, like IVs and pills, both of which could cause severe noise if they fall over. She is basically trying to perform one of the most painful and loud tasks in a world that is trying to kill her if she makes so much as a sound. All of these disadvantages in this situation can almost be considered a disability in this world, as Evelyn has to walk on eggshells just to safely deliver her child. Just as many disabled people in the world have to do the same just to live a somewhat normal life, despite the dangers and disadvantages pushing down on them, forcing them to conform to society, even though society gives them little help through that process, just like the monsters in A Quiet Place do to Evelyn.
Now Reagan, Lee and Evelyn's already born daughter, gives us a great deal of insight into two more experiences rife with conformist pressure: disability and mental health. Reagan's deafness acts as both a blessing and a curse for the main family of A Quiet Place. On one hand, they already know how to communicate without speech by using sign language, but on the other, Reagan is not able to hear when she is making sound or when something around her is making or could make sound. A great example of this is the toy rocket ship that she gives back to Bo, even though it was taken for being loud, which through a series of bad decisions and mishaps leads to his death and a subsequent struggle between father and daughter as they both try to cope with the guilt. Put a pin in that. It'll come back in a minute. Throughout A Quiet Place, we often see Reagan forced to watch her family instead of participating because she is different. She is not allowed in the basement or on trips with her father because they fear that she will make sound, even though by now she seems to know how to not make noise. Earlier, we covered the pressure disabled people have on them to conform, and for Reagan, that pressure is to hear again. Here, Reagan's father continually tries to make a hearing aid for her using text scraps that he finds around for exactly that purpose. When Reagan tells him that she doesn't want it, he is confused and upset. In his eyes, he is trying to make her safer by making her normal, not understanding that she wants to prove that she can do things herself, that she is not a liability, like many, many disabled people in our world. This is actually a direct result of Beau's death, as the father and daughter are trying to cope in different ways. He feels guilty that she couldn't hear and wants to protect her, while she is trying to prove that she is capable even though she's deaf. But due to the world they live in, they must cope with their grief in silence instead of coming to an understanding. That's not that different from our own world, though. The mental health of people is entirely disregarded, and people are expected to keep their pain to themselves and suffer in silence. A family member's death is a great method of comparison. In our world, you are allowed to grieve for a few days, but once the funeral's over, you are expected to conform again and go back to work or school like it never happened. Everything else must be kept quiet. In A Quiet Place, that pressure is physical, as audible grief over the death of a loved one, a scream, a cry, anything will lead to your own death. And just like our own world, this forced silence leads to death. Instead of silently grieving his wife, the old man decides he's had enough and screams, killing himself. Lee, in his guilt over the loss of Beau and the fear of losing his other kids, screams to sacrifice himself. Reagan goes out to her brother's grave, cuts a wire of the toy and turns it on, seeming to tempt fate. If that was the wrong wire, she was meant to die. With these scenes, A Quiet Place is clearly making some form of comment on our society's pressure to suffer in silence.
That's all for today, folks. We could go on forever about all the different ways that the monsters of The Quiet Place represent conformity in different ways, but the class is only 75 minutes long. If you enjoyed this video, please consider checking out our other videos that we don't have, or perhaps even giving us an A on the project.